Let me then just start with the introduction.
Yes, I think that's useful.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session, which is organized at the occasion of the ECOSOC 2022 Partnership Forum. And this event is organized by the Geneva Consensus Foundation. And it's dedicated to launching a book, which is named Measuring SDG Performance, Measuring Performance on Sustainable Development Goals, which is an interesting topic in itself, given now the background of the SDG implementation, the approaching deadline, knowing that the successes are not so overwhelming. This topic is very interesting. My name is Martina Lubyova, and I'm the CEO at the Geneva Consensus Foundation, and I will be moderating the events today. And I will try to refrain from talking about the book myself, although I really like the book, because we have a very interesting panel that will introduce the book and introduce the concepts that lie behind the book, behind the analysis in the book. So let me first quickly start by introducing the authors and the panelists. And we will have the first author of the book, who is Professor Dr. Sten Thore, who is the Centennial Fellow Emeritus at the Texas University, and he's also affiliated to the IC2 Institute of the Texas University think tank. And he's author of the first part of the book, but due to his advanced age, he will not be able to join us today in an interactive manner through this platform, but he recorded a short video in which he will introduce to us the method which is behind the analysis in the book. This is the operations research method, and he will tell us some interesting examples of how this can be used for measuring the SDG performance. The method and the authors of the method have received a Nobel Prize at the time for this method, and it's a very promising methodology in nowadays social analysis. Then he will be followed by the second author, who is Dr. Ruzanna Tarverdyan. She's here with us. Welcome, Ruzanna. She's the founding president of the Geneva Consensus Foundation and author of the second part of the book. And she will tell us something about measuring the SDGs performance, but also about how this could lead to building a broader consensus, eventually leading to a new social contract, which is also a very interesting topic in nowadays, you know, a world full of contradictions. The consensus idea, building a social contract idea, is very modern and very, very timely. And then the presentations will be followed by two discussants. The first one will be Dr. Jos Verbeek, who is here with us, and welcome to him. Hello. He is the lead author of the Global Monitoring Report, and he is a chief economic advisor at Quattro International. And also he was former manager and special representative to the United Nations and WTO. And Jos will tell us something about the applications of operations research to not only to measure, but to evaluate the SDG performance and to identify the deficits in this field, country-specific deficits, and to eventually come up with the corrections. So this is another interesting topic, which will be then followed by our second discussant, Mr. Karel Langeker, who is the Operation Research Master Program student at LSE, London School of Economics, and he will tell us something about the applications of operations research in performance evaluation. So you see, you will hear about a lot of interesting and exciting topics today, and we will also like you to be able to enjoy the discussion and to be able to discuss and join. That's why we allow for some time at the end for general discussion, questions and answers. If any one of you has a question that pops up, comes to your mind during the presentations, you can use the chat feature in this platform to send a question to everyone or to some of the panelists, and then they will be happy to deal with it when the time comes. Or at the end of the session, during the general discussion, you can use the feature for raising your hand electronically to give us a signal that you would like to speak, and we will give you the floor. Now, we have 50 minutes for the session altogether. So let me now not take more time and pass the floor to the first author, Honorable Professor Dr. Sten Thore, and we will play his short video where he will explain the basics, rationale of the operations research as a main method and tool for measuring the performance on SDGs.
So I'm going to put on the video, and I'd
like to say a few words about the intellectual fathers of data development analysis, Abe Charles and Bill Cooper. They belong to that first generation of scholars who created the science that we today call operations research. Their work on the blending of aviation gasolines in 1952 inaugurated the use of linear programming as a practical numerical tool. During the following 2 decades, they published a flood of seminal papers on management science. Charles held a chair at the Northwestern University, where I first met him in 1963. Bill Cooper became the dean of the innovative School of Urban and Public Affairs at Carnegie Mellon, the first of its kind in the US. His idea was to extend management science to a science of urban and public affairs as well. That work bore spectacular fruit when in 1978 a Ph.D. student of Bill Cooper started looking at a US preschool program for disadvantaged children called Follow Through. Abe and Bill devised a method of ranking the results of the participating schools, splitting them into envelope schools and sub-envelope schools. Data envelopment analysis had been born. Abe and Bill had a longtime friend, George Kosmetsky, who was fascinated by the methods of operations research. He decided to see if the new mathematics could be used to make money. He founded a company that would become one of the largest industrial combines in the nation. Eventually, Kosmetsky returned to the academic world, becoming dean of the business school at the University of Texas at Austin. One of his first moves was to invite Abe Charns to head a new cybernetic institute at the business school. Later, he donated money to the University of Texas, creating the IC² Institute: Innovation, Creativity, and Capital. He was able to induce Bill Cooper to join him. Finally, Abe and Bill were together again on the same campus, now working frenetically developing the potential of their new baby, data envelopment analysis. At this point in my story, I can report as a direct observer. Kosmetsky had invited me to join his new institute, where I was to stay for the next 18 years. I had for some time been intrigued by the failure of the economics profession to recognize the faltering economic performance of the Soviet Union and other nations practicing state socialism. Applying the new numerical technique and working with fellows at the Institute, I was able to show how those nations all fell below the envelope defined by the capitalist countries in the West. Next, together with Boaz Golani, a star student of Abe Charns, I started looking at the competitiveness of the world's leading economies. Later, we extended the criteria of ranking to take account of social variables such as education, health, and social welfare. Ruzanna Tarverdyan, at the time still working for the International Labour Organization, and I started our collaboration, responding to its call for the calculation of the decent work deficit of nations. If decent work is identified with achievements of policy along the envelope, the deficit is the shortfall below the envelope. Bill Cooper was now in his mid-90s, but still on the top of his intellectual powers. He took interest in our work, resulting in a joint paper published in 2011. We ranked nations both in terms of the goals of decent work and also the goal of a fair globalization. The present book grew out of that joint study, but Bill was not to see its completion.
So this is Martina, I wanted to make a comment here about this particular video, because Sten has made it during the presentation of our earlier book, the first volume, which was Diagnostics for a Globalized World. Nonetheless, this particular part has been represented in the new book. So that's why I thought it will be impossible for us to have an event without Sten being part of it. So I thought it was a good opportunity to share it with the audience. So do we have news from Mahmoud?
Yes, we do. He will join us in 5-10 minutes. Apparently he was scheduled for 1:50 instead of 1 o'clock, but he's on its way.
Okay.
Okay, so it's just now.
I think let me and say a few words before I pass the floor to Ruzanna, because here the reason why, Ruzanna, you were trying to play this video was that it provides a very good explanation even to a layman audience about the methods, about the operations research, which is to those who are not mathematicians or programmers. This is a numerical method. It came out from linear programming type of analysis, and it is solving a problem in a multi-dimensional space, which is very suitable for solving a problem in an environment that is defined by, let's say, 17 SDGs. Each of these SDGs represents one dimension. And so this is far beyond the three-dimensional world that most of us can imagine. So this method allows for modeling optimal frontiers of performance for countries, units, regions, institutions, in terms of delivering on SDGs, in terms of all the 17 parameters. So it is a multi-dimensional analytical method, which is at the same time empirical. It's just based on analysis on empirical data. There is not much of a modeling, exact modeling behind, because these countries are black boxes to us. They're so very different in terms of institutional background environments, so that it would be very difficult to model them in a micro way. So that's why this method has been used by many for solving real life issues and measuring performances on very interesting topics. And one of them is now the SDG performance. So that's why I believe you wanted to show this video so that the audience can understand what the method is. Now, I think by saying this, having said this, although I'm not really an expert in it, but after having read the book, I got this understanding, and I'm really excited and thrilled by the opportunity to use this method in evaluation of SDGs performance. I think now, while waiting for Mahmoud's comments, we could then give the floor to you, Ruzanna, not to waste the time, so that you can proceed to telling us about how this could be used in measuring SDGs, but also building broader consensus. So if you wouldn't mind, I would give you floor now to provide us with your part of the presentation on the second part of the book, and then we will join in with Mahmoud, who will also tell us his views.
No, I mean, I think that's a very good in terms of time management. So I have prepared a presentation presenting, as you rightly said, the origin of the work, how we came into the application of data envelopment analysis, and what are the possible applications in terms of forging a consensus. So one thing we would like to say is the origin, the Rio meeting and the Rio +20, which concluded the Future We Want document. And in the document, the government recognized that integrated social, economic, environmental data and information, as well as effective analysis and assessment of implementation, is important in decision-making process. And they recognize the need to promote an integrated approaches to policy making and at national, regional, local levels in order to promote sustainable development. And one of the important conclusion was that they underlined the need for more coherent and integrated planning and decision making at national, subnational, and local levels wherever it's appropriate. So one conclusion was the way forward was, as you rightly said, how to measure the progress towards the achievement of the SDGs. And that was to be done by the means of improved governance, transparency, fairness, accountability, and coherence. So the background of this particular book is very special. In 2016, jointly with Professor Thore, we wrote an article measuring sustainable competitiveness of nations. And in 2019, it attracted the attention of the European Economic and Social Committee. So what happened was that during one of the plenary sessions, when they were deciding about the future of sustainable development and listening to the people, they borrowed our definition of sustainable competitiveness. And what we were both, me and Professor Thore, very proud of, that there was a votation to choose between our own definition and the definition of the World Economic Forum, the big important giant who is very specialized in this domain, and with the majority of what the members of the committee chose to go with our definition. Following that political success, we were approached by Elsevier to see if we could grow this work into a volume. And yes, we've just worked further a couple of years, and we can now hold in our hands the book, which I'm very proud of. And as Martina said, the book has now been split into distinct parts. Given Professor's advanced stage, it became a bit difficult to have a regular contact in terms of joint articles. So we chose to have him writing part 1 and I concentrated on part 2. Another principle of this distinction was that Professor did more empirical work, and it would have not made sense for me to repeat data analysis in part 2. So that's why the part 1 of the book, it presents more analytical work, and in part 2 I bring in as more political economic dimension of the application of data envelopment analysis. Another important aspect of this distinction is that in the first part we are presenting how economists view the development. In part 2 we say how political decision makers are building on economic research. I think in that sense, we came up with a very nice compilation of a book. So the book, I will just like to give you a general overview of the book. So it has a balanced and holistic paradigm for evaluating progress of the SDGs. In the book, we make a quest for new paradigm for achieving sustainable globalization. As you will note here, I'm not calling about sustainable development, but I'm using the expression of sustainable globalization. The reason of doing that is I myself, as an author of the second part, I have a chapter about sustainable globalization, and the idea is that all the processes we are experiencing today must be viewed within the context of globalization. We are in a globalized world, and we cannot speak about sustainable development unless we address globalization as a phenomenon in its multidimensional capacity. So the book indeed presents data envelopment analysis as a solution to addressing a large number of policymaking questions. We present Geneva Consensus Foundation as an added value to policymakers because the foundation itself, being non-governmental, a neutral or a platform, is set to provide analytical underpinning that decision makers need to forge consensus. And as Martina rightly said, we end up proposing the new social contract, which is the way like all development stakeholders will have to agree to about their way forward. Speaking about the shift in the paradigm, we know that globalization itself has multiple dimensions, and managing globalization itself implies objective-oriented approaches, and this is what lies in the heart of the data envelopment analysis. And if we are looking about managing globalization, one thing that comes to the head, and that has been discussed long among development practitioners, is how to maximize the benefits of the globalization and minimize its cost. So that's the important way of looking at managing globalization, giving human face, and ensuring sustainable development. Within that context, we have the efficiency. We are looking the data envelopment. I have a chat here. We have to see, someone is saying, okay, so I thought maybe it might be Mahmoud. So we have here three issues, like three notions which we are addressing or providing with the application of data development analysis. The first question we address is address of efficiency. The efficiency within our analysis implies how successful are countries in achieving more benefits from globalization at lower costs. So which means they are using the policy measures or other measures with a lower possible cost to ensure the higher maximum possible outcome. Speaking about effectivenesses, we have put an objectives and we are looking at what is the distance between observed impact and the set of desired sustainable development goals of the government. So in this context, I wanted to highlight particularly that the added value of the work of me jointly with Professor Thore and Cooper is precisely in bringing the notion of efficiency to effectiveness, because when we apply the DEA to cross-country analysis, we are addressing more the effectiveness, looking at the objectives and country development agendas. And indeed, we are also addressing the issue of equity. How fair are the countries in allocating resources and when distributing the benefits? And indeed, we are looking here within multidimensional context, looking from economic efficiency, social economic, and sustainability. And what I call them 3 E's, I mean, efficiency, effectiveness, and equity, and rebalancing, convergence, and recovery. I'm sorry. So, I mean, indeed, when we look at the globalization, there are multiple hierarchical levels and causal map that is interlinking. From one side, we have the sustainable development as a notion that brings its multiple dimensions of development, employment, rights at work, social protection, dialogue, etc. We have the globalization that implies movement of goods, capital, ideas. And of course, now the COVID has taught us, of course, that we have also more movement of the tiny little virus that makes whole globalization notion absolutely challenged. And we have the human, technological, and institutional natural resources and policy perimeters that are just putting forth for achieving our objectives. In this particular book, we presented a new quantitative and analytical framework, and we demonstrate how nations can be ranked in terms of their performance in meeting given set of SDGs. When I say given set, this implies that each time when an analyst chooses a particular set of objectives, the goals, we come up with different outcomes. So this is the beauty about data development analysis. Depending on the number of or particular set of SDGs, we will be able to identify absolutely different outcomes and different pictures. We also show that, I mean, the part which Professor Thore did, it showed that even before the arrival of COVID virus, there existed in several large Western nations undetected pockets of the SDG deficits, and he nicely evaluated, quantified those deficits. And we also extended the calculation, I mean, data. We have been using the data for 2020 indeed, and we discovered that the deficit nations also presented a large number of deaths that were then caused by the virus. So there are a few key features our book presents. It includes, as I already mentioned, novel tool, procedure, and diagnostics for measuring and evaluating the entire spectrum of the SDGs in the wide variety of settings. I'll speak about it in a little while. It ranks nations according to their social and economic performance based on each nation's unique resource. And I mean, this is a very big advantage of the data development analysis compared to the other analytical tools. And it also examines international efforts towards shaping a new social contract between global partners. And one of the new conclusions that we came up after 15 years of joint collaboration with Sten is the connection between calculus of consent and we provide a logical foundation for forging Geneva Consensus for Sustainable Development. So in this chart, I try to show how complicated and complex is the Sustainable Development Goals as it applies to all different levels, at the household level, individual level, community level. I mean, it has also national, we can look at the, subnational, regional, sub-regional. What are the inputs of all different resources, including national budgets, trade and development projects, and official development assistance can contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And indeed, we have also a generational aspect of the SDGs, because when we speak about sustainable development, we want to ensure the future for sustainable development for the future generation, and this is a new aspect where generational accounting has to become into the discussion. So this is my favorite chart in the book, because that shows us whether a COVID is a factor of globalization or COVID is the outcome of the globalization. And this is precisely depending on how we view the phenomenon of the virus and pandemic. We might have large number of diverse analytical papers, depending whether we see it as an input to the globalization or we view COVID as the output. Within the policy impact analysis, we will now have like the policies which come from environmental, economic, social, macroeconomic, micro, etc. We have the globalization, as I already mentioned, with its 4 main dimensions, speaking about fair globalization and sustainable development, which I expand beyond economic, social, environmental protection to peace and security, having institutional aspects of development as well. So, I mean, we are not the first one to look at the impact of policy and poverty. In that context, I mean, OECD already has done a very good job highlighting multiple dimensions of poverty. This only shows how far we are today from addressing impact of policies on the poverty, because most of the papers only capture income dimensions of the aspect of the poverty, whereas we very well know that there are all other aspects of the poverty to be addressed in the future endeavors. So what was the data envelopment analysis? So as Sten rightly meant, it is a science, a field of expertise that spans the boundaries of several academic areas. It includes the management science, operation research, economics, and mathematics. And this technique has had a very wide application, looking at the impact of different decision-making units ranging from countries, regions, cities, enterprises, banks, schools, etc. So I will quickly address the whole notion of the DEA, which is how we compare the countries or units' performance within another peers having the similar set of resources, input and output. And the performance of specific unit, in our case, the A, is extrapolated to the closest envelope of the successful performing unit. So, I mean, when we look at the input-output framework, of course, in terms of variables and impact, it goes through different institutions, and all the variables about those institutions have to be addressed. And these are the enterprises, distribution channels, labor market, households. This simply implies, again, how complex, how rich is the capacity of this technique, and it can be applied in different domains. And speaking about the input-output framework, here again, we can have inputs and output representing different issues. It can be cost, benefits, desirables, undesirables, risks and returns, bad and good, effort satisfaction, and finally, policy variables and performance variables. The important key core of the data envelopment analysis is what we call Pareto-Kopman efficiency. And this is exactly what then builds for forging consensus and for coming to social contract, because when we speak about social contract, all participants or stakeholders, what they want is that nobody's position is worsened, improved, unless we worsen the position of the others. So this is the notion why we connect the DEA with the possibility of forging social contract, and also coming to the consensus. In this chart, I presented nicely all different decision-making units we can have. And what is the way forward? The way forward would be to have a social contract for the pro-development, environmentally friendly, socially responsible globalization. But then, as Kopman said in his Nobel lecture, economists as such doesn't advocate the criteria of optimality. He may invent them, he will discuss their pros and cons, but ultimately the choice is made in a process of decision-making, political decision-making. And this is where we have how complicated, how many participants we have at the country level when we come to develop strategies for sustainable development. There are different ways of looking at the analysis. We can have the multiple level analysis where inputs from one level can serve as an output for the other, where the output at first level can be serving as an input for the next one. And we can have different scenarios. So what we have here is the definition of strategies for sustainable development. Already in 2001, OECD in their guidelines for sustainable development, they mentioned a strategy for sustainable development is integrating the economic, social, environmental objectives of society in order to maximize human well-being in the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And the good strategy was a coordinated set of participatory and continuously improving processes of analysis, debate, capacity strengthening, planning, and investment, which seeks to integrate short and long-term economic and social environmental objectives of the society through mutually supportive approaches where possible and making trade-offs where it is not possible. So the key word in all this expression was a trade-off, because it is the strongest advantage of the data envelopment analysis to provide information that will help politicians to deal with the trade-offs. So coming back to the Geneva Consensus Foundation, I wanted to state that the foundation was created, as rightly mentioned by Sten Thore, in our first book to put forward our knowledge into application. So we know that there are hundreds and thousands of good ideas which are reflected in articles on the books, but in order to put forward the idea, there is a need of institutional setting. And it is for that purpose in 2013, I set up the Geneva Consensus Foundation. The objective of the foundation is contribute to the world polity and through the international consensus building processes to put in place global partnership for sustainable development, ensure policy coherence for development and the achievement of the SDGs. It's noteworthy that in 2013, the SDGs were not in existence, but nonetheless, we have showed forward-looking approach, and that went into our constitutional objective. The foundation was awarded with a special economics ECOSOC status, consultative status in 2016. And on the map, on the chart here, what you can see is that we view the decision-making with the application of DEA as an interactive and interactive process where the data goes into building the first option of the model, which apparently has been presented in our book and multiple articles. We then collaborate with key stakeholders, and then we come up with expert discussions, and then we have a possibility, and this is the biggest advantage of the DEA, to go to another space, learning and improving our model solutions and using the new data and coming up with the next phase of the analysis. So that's one of the biggest advantages that the DA provides. So here I would like to stop. I mean, it's clearly impossible to cover all the aspects of the book. I mean, I'm at your disposal for any further discussions and questions you may wish to have. I mean, I share with you my email address, and you can also contact through the contact form of the foundation, and we will address the questions after, if you so desire.
Thank you, Ruzanna, for this presentation. I myself, I'm not so very versatile with all these Zoom platforms, and I was not able to see the slides actually. So in the case there were some other people like myself, may I suggest that you could also share your presentation through the chat, which is here in the... Yeah. I think and
So,
it would
but
be
you
also
should
nice
have told me before.
people, but I'm not sure how it works with various audiences, but at
I
least
don't
they
know,
hear
let me see.
it's possible to attach a file, so if you don't mind, and
No,
you can share
definitely,
the
this is definitely. In any case, the video is going to present it,
Okay.
and we will be sharing the video with all the participants.
so reflect on these issues afterwards and keep some memories of these concepts and see the
Definitely.
main...
I'm sorry, you should have alerted me before.
Okay, whatever. I think some of you may have seen it. So now, and in the meantime, we have a good news that Mahmoud Mohildan was able to join us. At least I hope he's on here with us. Okay, I see the picture. I see now he's even joining. And welcome, Mahmoud. We are very happy to have you. See, we already started with the presentations, but we alerted the audience that you will come up also with your remarks and comments after the authors of the book. Let me introduce you to the audience. Mahmoud is a executive director at the International Monetary Fund, and he's the special UN envoy for 2030 development agenda. And prior to that, he served as a senior vice president of the World Bank. So we are very happy to have you here, Mahmoud. And now let me then pass the floor to you to provide your remarks. The floor is yours, please.
Right. Thank you so much. I hope that you can hear me well.
Yeah.
Yes,
Very
it
good.
seems it works.
Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. And apologies, because it seems that I was a victim of data inaccuracy in a way. I thought that the meeting will start at 1:50, not ending at 1:50. Anyways, please accept my apologies for that. And I'm happy from the very beginning of this process to be part, in a way, of seeing this new book published. It's a great addition to our knowledge, as I put in the foreword that I shared, based on the excellent work by the authors in the past, building on it nicely as well now on measuring sustainable development goals, but now focusing on efficiency and performance, in addition to the other aspect that just had been highlighted. Very grateful to the great work by Thore and Tarverdyan on the work in measurement. My plan is, that was basically for opening remarks, but just now consider them as remarks, is coming from this notion of the rights to knowledge and importance of data. And it is attributed to the very well-known Chinese philosopher that if words lose their meaning, people lose their freedom. And we are not doing any better when it comes to data, when data lose their meaning in different contexts. And I like to share a couple of examples and perhaps emphasize a couple of points at the end on the way forward, guided by the spirit of this important addition to our knowledge. From the very beginning of the process of designing the SDGs, they were very much evidence-based. You remember the 169 and 230, the 17 goals, the 169 targets, and the then 230 indicators to measure them. It was actually even back in 2013 when the SDGs and the 2030 agenda were called the post-2015 agenda or initiative. It was very much a very big challenge to find the means, the support, the investments in data systems to make us more aware of what's really happening in the field. My good colleague and friend, Jos Verbeek, in previous life when he was doing the, among other colleagues in the bank, the GMR the Global Monitoring Report focusing on MDGs, there were a lot of data concerns. And I remember that 3 lessons came out from the MDG process to the SDG process, more relevant even today when we're talking about accelerating the SDGs, that we need data, adequate finance, and better implementation. And you can really see the centrality of data in the first one. We need accurate data. And finance cannot really be guided without accurate data. And implementation, you cannot monitor or review without data. So it's data all over, and any kind of effort to improve our knowledge in this area is more than welcome. So very recently, and I'm contacting you today from Egypt, which is going to be the host of COP27 in few months in November. But few months back when I was in Glasgow, like many others, we're very much puzzled by many things. The claims to do better, the pledges that have never been monitored, even the famous $100 billion that goes back to the days of Copenhagen for SDG 13, which is basically climate agenda. You got 2 respectable organizations, OECD DAC through an independent panel, saying that we did better last, that we managed to have almost 79% or 80% of the finances transformed or channeled to the developing economies from the advanced economies. And then from the same perspective of trying to monitor, another respectable organization, Oxfam, saying, no, it's not 80%, it's only 20%. So we're not talking here about some individual estimates, but very well-respected organizations with a reputation to defend. If you are a consumer of data, as we all are, you would be really puzzled. Is it 80 or 20? We're not talking here about a small margin of error. And of course, everybody in this business know that even if we have 100 billion or multiple of 100 billion, it may not really be sufficient to achieve the SDG 13 targets or climate targets. But it's basically about the principle. You claim doing, not you, but generally speaking, we claim that we are doing something, but it's not really reflected in reality. And if it is not really captured fully by finance, and there is such a big dispute about the figures, you have all the rights to have this kind of unhappiness, discontent, and lack of trust between the different stakeholders. So this is very much at the global level, and this is one of the areas that Secretary General of the UN had been really pushing the whole global development system to say, let's verify the data, let's go to the standards. And this is just in one area, very important, very critical, SDG 13. And again, you go and pick any of the goals, you can really see these kind of discrepancy in terms of what is being claimed and what is being actually measured. So I think while we are doing the acceleration, and you may have seen our common agenda, the new document coming from the Secretary General has a very strong focus on taking the data more seriously than what we have been doing. And the only way to bring us back and channel finance better is to improve data systems and to have better monitoring and evaluation of what's at. Now, where I'm calling you from, there is a very big initiative on the localization of the SDGs in the most vulnerable, perhaps desperate communities through localization of SDGs in a program called Decent Life or Haya Karima in Arabic language. And it's all based on good data about priorities, which village should be taken first based on its poverty profile, its lack of access to basic services, including water, energy, and other means. Here, you can see another aspect that is going to be followed by huge funding. Almost 5% of the GDP of this country is going to be channeled based on such information. And people would know more if they have better monitoring and evaluation as well happen without better data systems to guide the whole thing. I think at some stage, OECD is talking about the 1% that could save the 100%. And the 1% here, they are saying, let's invest 1% in data and data systems to help policymakers and improve the governance of SDGs related projects as part of the ODA work. But as we know, ODA is just a small contribution of the big sources of finance and funding. So if you need it for ODA finance, you need it for finance, you need it definitely for public finance. This brings me into another area, and very quickly, related to what you just mentioned about the efficiency and effectiveness. The bulk of finance and investments in the SDGs, based on the estimates of the IMF and the World Bank before and the UN, is in infrastructure. And you may see that infrastructure is tangible enough. I don't really know what's happening, but a recent report by the IMF and other contributors to it as well on governance of infrastructure told us the following. At OECD level, there is 20% of what being spent in dollar terms are wasted. And we don't know if it is because of governance issues, monitoring matters, design issues. And then if this is OECD, you can see the middle income countries losing as much as 30 to 40% of what's being spent. And the figure goes even higher than that in low income countries at reaching more than 50%. This is huge when you can consider the kind of waste in these kind of infrastructure projects. This is another claim for the importance of getting the data more seriously. Let me conclude by just two quick things. One from the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, Amina Mohammed, when she was speaking about the importance of data in the UN World Forum and talking about the data revolution. That was the call of getting the data more seriously back in 2013-2015. But we are seeing that all of these open data systems, open data hubs for sustainable development don't have adequate access by all, because some of the people who need really to get the kind of information lack access to electricity or lack access to the internet, and they don't have the means to get that done. So I think some sort of prioritization and democratization of data access would be very much required. It's not just about monitoring and reporting. It's basically about opportunities as well. Having better data using common sense, it means that the graduates will try to find better job opportunities, and they can learn more about how to protect them from any kind of discrimination. We can channel finance for health, education, where it matters more. There are some initiatives, including the ID4D from the World Bank, including the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. But all of these global initiatives need to be cascaded to the national level, to the local level, in order to help the countries achieving their goals and targets. The final point is basically about the importance of the private sector as a provider of data now, and how to contribute to the importance of the governance systems when it comes to the importance of a more digitalized world that what we have. Governments alone cannot really do it. This requires better collaboration from the business sector, as lots of data systems are being fed by data by the private sector and other stakeholders. And then I think my good friend, again, Jos, is going to be speaking about one of the interesting issues about the country level and ranking of countries. We have seen that engagement at the country level is basically the ultimate goal, even at more subnational level than just the country level. We see that many of the initiatives, including the most recently announced global gateway by the EU, is assuming that we have better data systems and to feed the integrated national financial frameworks, which are thirsty for better data at the country level. But when it comes to ranking, I think we need to get that with a great deal of humility, based on the experience that we have seen recently from the doing business. When you don't really have a well-established methodology, and even if you have the well-established methodology, but you don't communicate it better, we can really get some sort of unhappy shocks. And to the extent that some of the products like the Doing Business report could be stopped. I'm saying that because I know that, that there are many efforts in order to improve the data and to rank countries. And the ranking here is not for shaming, for naming and shaming, but primarily for encouraging countries to do better. But countries would be more comfortable if the metric that is being used is well established and is not subject to any kind of methodological challenge or any kind of other disputes about it. Having said that, the work as coming out from this very important volume, again, congratulations to the authors, will help, if effectively implemented, policymakers and those who are concerned about development going forward. Thank you so much, and apologies again for this unnecessary confusion about the accuracy of data when it came to time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahmoud, for this excellent and very interesting presentation. I think it was even better to have it now, after having been introduced to the method, and people can extract more sense out of it, as if it was said at the beginning. So even, you know, this was actually a good timing. And I can only agree with you, and I think most of our participants would agree that, you know, there is a dark need for more data and more analysis of the data. And as you know, as you all know, we are living in the age of ranking, where all the countries are ranked on this and that, and we live at the age of global indices of this and that, whereas these indices are usually based on some pre-programmed or pre-assumed formulas. After correcting for all the data deficiencies that you mentioned, the formulas are not even elaborate anymore, because it's impossible to fill them with the data properly. And then it boils down to a bipolar measure, you know, index something's 0 to something, or minus to plus. Whereas I think the methods that we are presenting today are much more complex, because they are based on, let's say, empirical, you know, numerical analysis in a multidimensional space. So they provide a completely different point of view and different approach to measuring the you know, the performance of the countries, of the units. And the data envelopment analysis is a way how to define an optimal frontier of performance in this multidimensional space. And it also provides, if I'm not mistaken, a way of identifying the deficits and actually suggesting the correction. So this is a very big step forward in terms of analysis and evaluation of the SDG performance. But we have two big experts on these issues, and then I'm now very happy to pass the floor to our two discussants. Let me first now suggest that we listen to the discussion by Jos Verbeek, who will talk about applications of operations research in measuring exactly these country deficits and taking some corrections. So Jos, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Martina. It's always fun to be the fourth speaker in a row of three very distinguished ones before you, of which one of you used to be your former boss, who knows you inside out, and then of course brings all the issues up that we used to be discussing in the office very often: the issues about data, the issue about finance, the issue about quality of implementation. One issue, dimension he basically forgot to mention, which I thought was always dear to him, that was the issue of leadership. No, I mean, another dimension that often you want to throw into analysis to see how good the country is performing, or how it could improve if it's lacking any leadership. But anyway, first, of course, congratulations to Sten and Ruzanna for this book they've written together. And of course, for Mahmoud for his inspiring remarks, as usual, showing we have a long way to go before we're reaching the SDGs, but at the same time, giving some interesting solutions or areas that we can find solutions to be able to perform better. Now, I think that Ruzanna and I have talked about many times in Geneva when I was still based there, as you mentioned, that DAA is the analysis is not always well understood. And because of that, probably not used as much as it could or it should. And I think that this book will entice many more analysts and policymakers to start using DEA in their work. Yeah? And I'm quite happy to be here and to speak on the subject of DEA. I want to talk a bit about a new application, but first a bit of background, so you will better understand how we got to this application and what we're trying to do. Why do I find DEA an attractive tool for analysis? Well, it's data-driven. It distinguishes among inputs and outputs. And it allows for benchmarking without setting the importance of inputs in advance. I think, Martina, you mentioned this in your remarks towards Mahmoud, that very much people have a 0 or a 1, and it's all predetermined. People say something is important, and then they put a higher weight to it. And I think DEA doesn't do that. This makes it very attractive to use as a benchmarking and ranking tool, actually, in my opinion, because it doesn't use the same weight to see how Switzerland is performing on the SDGs as it would do for Bangladesh or Burkina Faso, to pick just a few countries. The DEA will choose those weights to be used during the optimization process. Therefore, I think that this method is close to perfect to make comparisons about countries, as it will consider how different levels of an input affect the outcome, say in this case, the SDGs. You can then compare peers of countries much more fruitfully with one another and point out how effective one is compared to another. Without such an adjustment, we always get the same countries as best performers and the same usual suspects as the worst. This DEA analysis might actually show that Burkina Faso might be a best performer given the inputs it has at its disposal, be it capacity to implement, be it data, be it good policies, good leadership. And therefore, a top performer, while Switzerland might be a top performer in absolute terms, but not doing it as efficiently or effectively as it could or should. Yeah? And I think the DEA analysis really helps with making these things much clearer. Yeah? Building on analysis that was done, and I also see Miriam on the screen somewhere, at the World Bank Group, and which we focused on using actually GDP per capita as a sort of an organizing principle to group countries together, and through that to provide some form of incentives to countries to check how, and as importantly, what their peers are doing well, and what they themselves are doing well or not so well, and then create, as Mahmoud also mentioned, incentives to learn from one another, what to do to close the gap, and what not to do. Now, we are now preparing a paper using the DEA analysis to get a step further and use a World Bank development indicator to evaluate countries' underlying capabilities. Because you can easily argue that if a country has a very good functioning set of institutions and policies, that they should be able to do better on implementation and attaining the SDGs than a country which doesn't have a very good set of policies in place or has just very weak institutions, not the capability to implement policies that they have on the books. Now, the bank, we call this particular index Country Policy and Institutional Assessment. It's also called CPIA, and it evaluates countries' policies and institutions over various clusters and dimensions. I will quickly mention them. I have no real time to go into detail, but they look at the quality of macroeconomic management. It looks at the implementation of structural policies, policies for social inclusion, and also public sector management and institutions, also often labeled the governance cluster. And as you can see, it's quite a comprehensive index. And one of the strong points of this set of indicators is that it can only be changed through inputs. Yeah? Very often we monitor if a country is doing well because we look at the outcomes. Yeah? What is it doing on educational attainment? Or what is it doing related to GDP growth? But of course, there are lots of inputs below there which actually are affecting that outcome. Yeah? And with the CPIA, we are only allowed to change it, improve it, or the World Bank staff is only allowed it, not that anymore, sorry. Work for a different organization nowadays. But anyway, the point is that you can only change the CPIA, this index, if actually underlying policies and institutions have changed. Yeah? If they improve, the index goes up. If it deteriorates, the index goes down. It's not related to outputs or outcomes. Yeah? And the CPIA index is prepared actually annually. It's published for all IDA countries, unfortunately not for IBRD countries, which I think is really not a good thing that it's not published. And it's actually very seriously taken in the World Bank, as it's critical input to how actually IDA resources are allocated to countries. Now, for you who don't know IDA or are not that familiar with World Bank different windows, but IDA, the International Development Association window, is a window through which the poorest set of countries in the world can get credits and grants from the World Bank. Now, we think it is the best, or at least one of the best indicators to use as proxy of a country's capability to effectively and efficiently implement policies and use its institutions to do so. I must admit, we have not done the analysis yet. Yeah? We're still in the sort of the putting it together phase. And of course, I blame Ruzanna for that because she had to finish the book with Thore, which within her own DEA analysis was probably more effective and efficient to do than to work on this paper with me, and Miriam in the past was also involved. So I'm just joking about this, but it's clear that we're going to take this forward, because I think it's very important actually that you do make benchmarks. I think it's very important that you rank countries, but if you rank them just of absolute outcomes without correcting for a country's capabilities, or like Mahmoud was mentioning, data, capacity to implement, capacity of financing, but we also should look at what is the underlying ability then of a country to use this. And this is, of course, his dimension maybe of implementation. This for me is the dimensions of policies and institutional setting. So the bottom line is that we all know that successful development requires good policies and strong institutions. And as I mentioned already, probably solid leadership as well. And I think that the DA analysis allows us for a rather unbiased approach to teach out performance on the SDGs, correct this for a country's capabilities to design and implement policy. I wanted to highlight this because it's one of the many interesting applications of DEA analysis. Yeah. So stay tuned as our paper will come out soon, between quotation marks, I hope. And thank you very much for listening, giving me the 5 minutes to talk to you about this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jos. And this is once again very enlightening and interesting. And we keep our fingers crossed for the publication to come out as soon as possible. And right after we finish, I will discuss with Ruzanna whether she could join the team and help with the, after she finished her private DEA analysis, to help with this other analysis. In principle, you inspired me to say that in this book, the methods were used to evaluate the performance on SDGs. In principle, it could be used to evaluate performance on any other global indicators or concepts that are now, where the music plays, decent life, decent work, better life of the OECD and so on. So we all know all these concepts that need to be measured and need to be evaluated. And the charm of the method is that it can be applied in any of these frameworks, basically. So now, by having said this, let me bridge over to the final discussion of today, the final discussant, who is Karl Langeker. He's expert on operations method analysis, and he will talk about the applications in evaluation performance. So, Karl, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to speak here. It's a big honor for me. Yeah, so I'd first like to thank the organizers of this site event for letting me talk. So I'm speaking today as a representative for the Operations Research Program at the London School of Economics. But more so, I'm very proud to represent my 91-year-old grandfather, Dr. Sten Thore, who has authored the first part of this book, and is a large part of what I am speaking today. So I've consulted with him on what I will be saying, and I'm excited, therefore, to share both my own, but also a reflection of his thoughts as well on his section of the book, aka the first part of the book. So the book provides a good example of the analytical power that lies in operations research. It shows how we can use complex mathematics to investigate important problems of the present world, and indeed important to us here in the UK as well. The statistical material brought from the OECD database in Paris includes some quite worrisome information about the shortcomings of both economic and social policy in this country, and also about the devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the history of the science of operations research provides examples of how pressing real-world problems prompted the development of new mathematical tools. And so this started with the very first practical example of linear programming, which dealt with the problem of the blending of aviation gasoline for an airline, and it helped them to optimize this task that they were faced with. And so in the present instance, it is used for a wide array of tasks, such as in Dr. Thore's case, dealing with questions of the survival of market capitalism, and evaluating cases of this in the Western world. And so furthermore, a new mathematical prototype, which has been used in this book and has been added to the toolbox of operations research, is the problem of fractional programming. And this is where we have a maximization problem, yes, with fractions appearing both in the maximum and in the constraints, and therefore very much change the nature of how we solve a program like that. And so, rather remarkably, the fractional problem has a striking geometric interpretation, which has already been discussed a lot today, which is determining the upper convex envelope to a scatter of points in a multidimensional space. In other words, the techniques of so-called data development analysis, as proposed in 1978, are now brought to our attention as we try to analyze the present data that has been collected by the OECD. So in the opening chapters of the book, both authors describe the work of the UN and progress that has been made in combating still ongoing issues, such as poverty, disease, famine, and warfare. And in one sense, the UN's efforts have been a big success, as the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the detailed recognition of 230 SDG indicators have both very much set the stage for international efforts to document these goals statistically. So the book is one of the first tapping into this mine of data and these goals as a requirement for linear programs and fractional programs, and should be applauded for this pioneering effort. And so the list of indicators used describe both personal circumstances of a population in a country, as well as human action impacting upon the climate and the environment. And I believe the result is a very revealing picture of social and economic conditions in the member nations before the COVID-19 pandemic started and spread across the world. And so an interesting and relevant example of the work that has been done can be shown through, for example, data tied to the United Kingdom or the UK. So it's interesting to see, as a lot of this data came as of January 2020, how is the UK doing in comparison with other OECD nations with regards to progress towards reaching sustainable development goals before the pandemic started. And so therefore, using a set of composite 7 indicators altogether, it is revealed that the UK, for example, fell quite far behind an OECD elite of 16 nations tracing the envelope frontier. And in fact, it exhibited shortages or deficits in terms of every single development indicator, which is quite shocking because the United Kingdom is often seen as a front runner in achieving these goals and these tasks. And therefore, this result seems even more demeaning when one looks at the list of peer nations that beat the UK, as this list includes countries such as Estonia, Greece, Hungary, Poland, and Mexico. Now, all these countries have a much lower GDP per capita and are also generally perceived often as having a lower standard of living by objective measures. And so the authors conclude that modernity is the enemy of sustainability, and that the economic development in rich Western countries, such as Italy or Germany, the UK, Canada, and even the US, have all been pursued for its own sake, and as a result have in many cases left in its wake pockets of commonly overlooked poverty. And so one thing that has to be considered here is that one has to be careful when being presented with all this mathematical analysis, because the analysis does not by itself reveal anything actually about causality. For instance, as of January 1st, 2020, the UK obesity rate was 27.8%. So why is the obesity rate in a country like the UK higher than in countries such as Portugal, Slovenia, and Slovakia, all of whom respectively have obesity rates below 22%, when the UK is far ahead in several metrics typically associated with standard of living and development and so on? And so looking at the numbers, you can get a very binary impression of this, but this could be attributed to a variety of possible reasons. These could be, for example, a decrease in manual labor jobs in favor of people transitioning to office jobs, or it could be increased economic access to methods of leisure and holiday. And thus, while it is easy to draw rash conclusions based on the data alone, one has to remember this is quite a fatal mistake in the world of statistics and operations research particularly. However, now that this data and these trends have been very much illustrated, there's still now a more clearly defined task that lies ahead, which is supported by the numbers, and this is where the strength lies. And this also shows that metrics often associated with a country's standing, such as GDP per capita, can be misleading with regards to how the standard of living in a country actually is, and the extent to which they're working towards SDGs, and the extent to which they're utilizing their resources in working towards the SDGs. For instance, while the UK has an average GDP per capita of $46,000, and Greece has a GDP per capita of $19,000, Greece is still far better at allocating its resources towards actually achieving sustainable development goals than we have here in the UK, for example. And other notable countries that were shown to be lagging behind in their work towards achieving the SDGs relative to the work that they could be doing include countries like Austria and Belgium, Ireland, and even Germany, all of which are countries with GDPs or GDP per capitas, I mean, over $40,000, and are generally perceived as being kind of front runners or leaders in their respective fields. And so let me now turn to the analysis of the COVID-19 pandemic presented in the book. So this is achieved by solving the fractional programming model that I mentioned earlier, but doing so again, and this time including the survival rate during the first waves of a pandemic as a sort of additional sustainable development goal or an additional constraint to the programming model. And so rather unexpectedly, the list of sub-efficient nations that I mentioned earlier after this analysis stays exactly the same. So the old goal deficits stay the same, and in addition, a COVID-19 survival deficit actually appears. And so in other words, the authors claim that, for example, the devastating onslaught of a virus in Italy in early 2020 and in the UK at Easter time could both have been predicted in a sense before they even started and before they even had their very first case, based on the conditions of these metrics. And so what does this really mean? Again, my grandfather, Dr. Thore, he says that he views industrialization, economic growth, and modernity as the culprit. And he refers to this on page 90, where he refers to economic growth as a juggernaut. And he writes that it navigates according to its own inscrutable designs, crushing under its wheels all attempts to steer it in a more sensible direction. Now, so to conclude, I believe that these results revealed by these mathematical calculations ultimately indicate current failings of the countries in the Western world that are commonly perceived as being leaders with regards to working towards the sustainable development goals. And rather, it is revealing that they're actually could be doing a lot better with regards to utilizing their resources on a national level towards combating real issues. And so hopefully this book will spur and continue initiatives that are currently being made to improve its track record and efforts to combat global issues. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Carl. And once again, thanks for incorporating also Dr. Thore's ideas and comments into your presentation. And we are very happy to have him here also through you. So I think, right, once again, just one recap from your presentation, and this was also mentioned by Jos, that this method can be used to identify certain effectiveness or influence of certain environment, performance, beyond the crude measure that is provided by quantitative indicators like the ever popular GDP, right? So you see that after this analysis, some countries have to be ready for surprises actually, but this is illuminating and this is actually highly informative for these countries. And on the basis of these gaps and deficits are identified with analysis, they can take an appropriate action. So I think that the method is even more valuable on these grounds. If I got it right in my layperson understanding, but I hope this is also for most of the participants would have by now remembered from this presentation. By now we have then finished all the discussion, organized discussions and presentations. We are running, far beyond the time allocated, but still having people with us. So obviously this is an interesting topic. I would like to give the floor now to participants for asking questions if they have any questions, comments, remarks. Some people have already shared the presentations or whatever they have comments and information through the chat. So I would like also to suggest to Ruzanna perhaps to leave this room open after we finish so that people can still come and download the files of the presentation if possible. So let us see now whether anyone would like to add something, ask something from the panelists. There is this feature through which you can raise your hand or you can try to physically somehow indicate if you're interested, but
I think people can unmute themselves. So I allow the possibility of unmuting. If somebody wants to talk, we can just let them talk.
Yes, right. So you can just unmute themselves, ask a question or make a comment if you wish to do that. Otherwise, perhaps let me also use this time to give the floor back to Ruzanna, who is the president of the foundation that organized this session, and to thank not only the authors for the book, but also to the foundation for organizing this interesting event, and eventually give you a floor now also for some concluding remarks or a final speech, Ruzanna, if you would.
No, I think I'm very grateful to all the panelists. It's absolutely impressive. I'm very most grateful to Mahmoud, who has been leading us, helping us to put the face into the book, having such an important endorsement coming from the the most competent expert in this domain. I mean, I agree with Jos that we would very much like to build on the current book, and we would expand it, trying to use the World Bank policy indicators and see how individual country conditions can be addressed within the context of the DEA. And of course, Carl's presentation for me is a representative of the future, the youth, because he is here presenting the voice of the youth. So, I mean, the Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development is going to lead the agenda of research and development cooperation and political for the many, many years to come. And I'm absolutely confident and sure that the technique we have tried to present here will have a resonance and echo in different contexts. And I'm very pleased to see how enthusiastic and engaged he is to moving forward and apply, I mean, building on the work of his grandfather. I think all people would have dreamed to have such a descendants who will take forward their ideas. The idea, I mean, the way forward, the Geneva Consensus Foundation, as I have mentioned, is accredited with the United Nations ECOSOC. So this gives us a possibility to engage with most important event, and this was a very fortunate opportunity for us to present the book, which just been published. The book was out in December, and this is a brilliant opportunity. We couldn't have imagined anything better in the COVID hit world. To present it, covering people from different countries, different domains, I mean, representing various stakeholders. So as you rightly mentioned, not only the room I will leave open, but the contact with the foundation is open for everybody. We are, I mean, I participated in the World Data Forum in November in Bern, and this was another huge event which was bringing together all important institutions engaged in data development and analysis. So what we are given now is, with the data revolution, we are given an unprecedented richness of information. And what is our task now? To try to translate this information into policy diagnostics and policy solutions in all different levels. It can be the country level, it can be the regional level, and it can go up to the global level. So the foundation is open for further feedback and contact. Anybody who believes they can build on this session are more welcome to get in touch with me through the portal of the foundation. The contacts are on the website of the ECOSOC, so it's going to stay there. And once again, thank you immensely of all the panelists for helping us celebrate this important achievement. And I'm sure after Sten will see our final video, he will be pleased to see, I mean, how much his work has been appreciated, and in the hope that it will have a bright future. So as you rightly said, if there are people who want to talk, they are most welcome to contribute. So I'm muting myself, and if there is anybody who wants to talk, most welcome.
Thank you so much, Ruzanna. In the meantime, we got a couple more messages from the people. Someone asked to share information by email, which of course we will. So let me just stress what Ruzanna said. We are open to discussion, open to contacts. We're very happy to have you here. We are very happy that we perhaps triggered some attention and inspiration in your minds towards using these concepts, towards using these methods. Open to continued cooperation. Please feel free to contact Ruzanna or us through the Geneva Consensus Foundation website, through the information at the ECOSOC Forum, and or any other means, and we'll be very happy then to continue our discussion and our cooperation. Once again, thanks a lot to all the speakers. You know, we really had a high-level panel today. I'm very happy. We had really a very good experts, and once again, let me perhaps finish by paying tribute to the work of Sten, who was not able to join us, but I hope that Carl, and also through video recording of this session, he will be able to see and appreciate the interest in this work. And let me wish him good health and still some, you know, inspiration in future doings. So thank you so much, all of you. We will not close the session. We will leave it open to the extent Ruzanna can do it through the Zoom platform. You should be able to come back to the discussion, download some links, and the presentation, and eventually to come back to us through the foundation website. So thank you very much all for participating, and I wish you a still nice day, nice events through the ECOSOC Partnership Forum, and a lot of sustainable development around you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. All the
Thanks
best.
so much.
All the
Thank
best.
you. Congratulations.
Well, this is our job,
All right.
Texas. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank
All
you
right,
all.
thank you. Goodbye. Have a
Well
nice
done.
day.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Congratulations, Ruzanna. Thank you to all the authors.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to have you all here sharing our special moment.
Great. Bye. Bye, Yoss. See you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So